Good evening, Assalamu alaikum, Namaskar. On behalf of BASE, I'm Mohammedul Hassan Dhabok. Welcome you to all in BASE lecture series. So before I start this session, I want to share something about BASE, that's Bengali Academia for Social Empowerment. It is a developmental organization registered as a trust by a collective of academicians, scholars, professionals, and other like-minded people who are working for community and social development. I must add that in this pandemic time, that this lockdown, loss of job, and also the devastating impact of Amphan affected West Bengal very badly. In this time, BASE opened more than 25 community kitchens all over the Bengal for Amphan affected poor people, migrant laborer, helpless people, and etc. It also distributed triples, dry food, medicine, and other related relief items. BASE also has helped many migrant laborers to go their own states. BASE and recently has distributed education kit for poor and first generation children for little bit encouragement. I must also share that the two offices of BASE are now available at Paksakas and Koikhali for the students who are from various districts of West Bengal for the purpose of appearing NEET, NET, and other related examinations and interviews, and also for the medical emergencies. Those people have nowhere to stay, they can come and stay in base office. It's free of cost. So I also must say that in this current socio-political scenario and backwardness, the certain section of society, we think that there is a tangible need to organize intellectually, and this is an effort to reach out as many as we can in various ways and platforms. Primarily, BASE is building a network of related people in higher educations, which is helpful in different ways, especially for information and resource sharing. This create a better linkage among concerned people of various institutions across Bengal, India, and abroad. BASE has been conducting online lecture series since last 2 months, and this BASE lecture series is a part of larger activities of BASE, which would serve as social awakening, gathering knowledge from different perspectives, and other holistic purpose. Today we have a BASE online lecture number 48, and the topic is A Passage to Pan-India, Choice of Food and Muslim Identity. And today's our speaker is Mr. Sabuj Sarkar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, University of Gour, Malda, West Bengal, India. I would request all the participants to turn off their audio and video and do not share your screen. If you have any question, write it on the chat box. Now I would request Dr. Kaifia Ansar Laskor, Assistant Professor, Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Ali University, to introduce and welcome today's speaker as well as today's chair. Dr. Kaifia Ansar Laskor, over to you.
Thank you, Hassan. Once again, I would like to welcome all the participants for joining today's BASE lecture. It's like the lecture is number 48. That means we have come a long way. So without taking much time, I am directly going to introduce both our speaker as well as our chair of today's lecture. Today's lecture is A Passage to Pan-India, Choice of Food and Muslim Identity. Our speaker for today's lecture is Mr. Sabuj Sarkar. He is an assistant professor of Department of English, University of Gour, India. He has been teaching since 2009. And so far, he has attended innumerable number of national and international seminars where he has presented his thoughts and ideas on folk culture, folk studies, cultural studies, and green studies. So he writes poems in English and Bengali. He has also edited a volume of Bengali poems, and one of them is Jolodorchi. It has been published in 2020. He is also the founding editor of Megdumbor, a literary magazine on folk issues. At present, he is also working on an anthology of English poems named titled Olosh. And today we are also fortunate to have among us our chair of the session is Professor Dr. Musarraf Khan Hussain. He is a doctoral awardee from New York University and currently teaching in Jindal Global University, India. He is also the founding editor at Cafe de Census, an online journal of literature, culture, and politics. His creative writings and political commentary pieces have appeared in various popular portals. His research interest lies in South Asian Muslim writers' attention to ordinary practices of illicit love, modern education, and consumerism. In contrast to extraordinary events, produces a discourse on the complex negotiation between the sacral and the secular by Muslims at the contemporary moment. Currently, he is also co-editing a book, Mapping Muslim Life in West Bengal, on political, literary, and cultural aspects of the Muslim life in post-independent West Bengal. Professor Khan has also presented invited lectures and research papers at Harvard University, Princeton University, New York University, among many other renowned Indian universities. So we have among us both the speaker as well as the chair who are into cultural studies and folklore and many other things. So we expect a very enriching and erudite, deliberation today. So over to you, Hassan. I would like to invite the speaker, the chair, sir, to speak something.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Laskar, so much for this, very, very, I would say, thoughtful introduction for both the speaker and the chair. And also my thanks to Base, as always. It's a pleasure to come back to. And also to Mr. Hassan Dhabak and Sheikh Abid, the constant source of inspiration behind this organization. Okay, so before I hand over the session to to today's speaker, we have some ideas about food and what food does to identity as such, or how food becomes a site of identity production. I'm not going to get into that now because we are waiting to hear from our speaker on that aspect. What I want to do at this moment, if I have the permission for next 5 minutes, is just to get into a very personal kind of memoirist kind of space where I want to talk from my own memory, because food is also very much a part of our cultural memory. Food is very much a part of our affective being. So it's very difficult sometimes to talk of food only in terms of, intellectualization or theorization, because food comes from that aspect, from our own personal belonging, sense of self, sense of space, sense of cultural memory. Because of this, I thought I'll start with a little bit of that sort of memoir while chairing the session. I'm remembering a couple of things from my own childhood, just to situate what food would mean to a Muslim, child who is growing up in a predominantly Hindu nation, and how food can set up this notion of difference. You understand that you are different for the first time on the basis of food more than anything else, actually. Because in the public sphere, you do not understand the difference all that much, because you are going to the same school, you are going to the same hospital, you are going to the same, as a child, to same even puja pandals, pandal hopping. So the marker of difference often starts at home, in the private space of food and other such rituals. Food is one such, as far as I remember. So I'll give you a couple of examples to start off with, and then we'll go to Professor Sarkar to hear his enriching lecture. One is, I remember when I was in my 7th or 8th standard, I was in a boarding school, and I was playing football, as we used to do in the afternoons, and suddenly a guy, one of my classmates, hit my leg by mistake. Of course it was not deliberate, but I was injured so bad I had to be hospitalized in our hospital inside the campus, in the school campus. And I was hospitalized, and I was in hospital for maybe 15, 20 days. It was so bad, my parents had to come there. And one thing stuck in my mind during the treatment, I remember even now, which was the compounder who was looking after me. One of the days he said, "Do not eat beef, because then this injury would not heal, because it was such deep injury. It is not going to heal." Of course, in a Ramakrishna Mission hostel, there was no provision for eating beef. That was out of the question. So where did that come from? That sort of a comment. It was not, of course, about the immediate thing of my injury. It was, of course, food as a marker of difference. That here is a Muslim boy who might be eating beef at home. So that it came from that sort of a space, right? So, as I said, how we know that we are different from others. These are those moments when we know that this thing makes me different from the rest. It's an altogether different matter that I don't eat beef at all. I don't eat any red meat at all. My father doesn't eat beef. In my family, interestingly, my mother eats beef. The rest of the kids, almost none of them eat beef. My father eats mutton. That's different. I'm starting with these personal memories because food is all about personal memory, because you cannot divest food from our own cultural memories. The second instance that I'm going to give you to start off, I'll take another 3-4 minutes, is an instance which is stuck in my mind even today. As a child, when I was growing up, I was home at the time. I was not yet sent off to a boarding school. There was this cattle market in my place, the place I come from in Bankura district, cattle market. And every Thursday evening, these traders would come there to set up the market for Friday cattle market, cattle fair. So every Thursday evening, my mother would ask me to go and buy beef for her because she loved beef. She loves beef, actually. So every Thursday evening, I'll go there to buy beef for her, along with a boy who was working in our house, because my mother would not be sending me alone, of course. So I wrote a piece on this very experience of how to eat beef in Bengal back in 2015, when the beef lynching was going on, the first spate of beef lynching across India. And it was published in one of these popular websites called antiserious.com, edited by Sumana Roy and others. I just want to read 2-3 paragraphs very, briefly in 3-4 minutes about what that experience entailed of buying beef, and what exactly happened when we went to buy beef, and what happened after that. Just, very briefly, let me just read to set the tone, and then we'll go to Professor Sarkar. I'm reading from my phone. As a young boy, my search for beef would start on a Thursday evening with Zafar, one of the teenage boys working in our house. With dusk, we would set out for the cattle market, which was set up by my grandfather along with his brothers around the time of independence, which operated on Fridays, when cattle traders, mostly Muslims, from hundreds of kilometers away converged to sell and buy cows, goats, chicken, ducks, and even camels before the Eid. Around the market, there were small huts which sold beef rice, chicken rice, sharbat, tea, pan, and other such necessities to the traders. The men running those small refreshment shops lived in surrounding villages and arrived on Thursday evening with provisions to cater to customers on Fridays. The huts were kept locked for the rest of the week. In the faint darkness of early evening, we trooped into those huts to buy cooked beef. Sometimes the beef would be ready when we arrived. At other times, we'd wait patiently, observing with amusement the dexterity of the cook's ladle. We noticed Hindu men, and rarely Muslim men, often drunk, loitering around to buy beef. This was an open secret, like those sex workers living on the edge of a pond close by, who hovered in search of clients. Beef, liquor, and the lure of cheap sex made those huts the most subversive of spaces on Thursday evenings, which melted away in the bright light of a Friday with the arrival of cattle traders. When we would reach home with the box of cooked beef, it was a delight to see my mother's face with the beef. While the beef was eaten with relish, the bones posed a problem. We had to get rid of them before our Hindu neighbors could find out we were actually Goru Keko Mochuman, beef eating Muslims, a derogatory term used to address Muslims in Bengal. My mother would carefully wrap the bones in a paper and send one of the boys at night to bury them some distance away from home. I'm not going to read more, of course. But my point is, food, when we talk about food, especially food as a marker of difference in the case of Muslims, it is very complicated because it can do two things, as we understand. On the one hand, it can create this romanticized idea of biryani, which is often talked about. When we say Muslim food, always we talk about biryani, but then it can also produce a stereotype that every Muslim eats beef, no Hindu eats beef. These sort of cultural markers, the markers of difference food could be a potential site for that marker of difference. On this note, I am really eagerly waiting to hear what Professor Sarkar has to say today. So I read out the title of his paper once more that he's going to present. The topic of his talk today is A Passage to Pan-India, Choice of Food and Muslim Identity. Over to you, Professor Sarkar.
Thank you, Professor Musharraf Khan, for your nice introductory lines and some of the brilliant memoirs just read out in front of us. Professor Dr. Kaifia Ansar Laskar and Hassan Dhawak, and to all the listeners today. Thank you to BES and the initiatives that Hassan was saying early in the introductory lines, how BES is doing some great job at the time of troubled times. And I wish BES grand success in their future initiatives. So I will be to my topic now, A Passage to Pan-India, Choice of Food and Muslim Identity. Yeah, of course. The kind of memoirs that Professor Musharraf Khan was sharing with all of us, that's brilliant. But what I would like to start with today, that my lecture has three separate sections, three separate angles. First of all, Islam as a religion. Choice of food by those people who practice Islam as a religion. And of course, I will gradually try to come in that very Indian context, how this kind of, two different angles will combine and will come in a particular platform and will converge. And in Indian context, how it will make a kind of a passage in a country called India. So,
স্যার একটু ডিস্টার্ব করবো স্যার, আপনার ভয়েসটা অনেক ক্র্যাক হচ্ছে, মনে হচ্ছে আশেপাশে ফ্যান চলছে, প্রচন্ড আওয়াজ হচ্ছে আর কি।
Okay, I think it's clear, more clear than earlier.
Yes.
Fine. So it's really challenging being a non-Muslim in that way, that that I am trying to move for a topic like this, and I couldn't actually resist myself when I was there to receive a proposal from Hassan to say something, and food is one of my favorite genre, history of food and the cultural aspects of food. So I will try to go deeper. I will try to find out some of those meanings and Islam as a religion, how they practice in particular way. Before I move for that, I would like to begin with certain basic questions. What do I really mean by Muslim identity? So my recent studies on Muslim identity and the consultation with so many texts, I found a kind of a very clear-cut and straightforward statement by Dar al-Ifta al-Misriya, a premier institute in Egypt, established in 1895. And the kind of statement they mention over there on Islamic identity, I quote from their, official website. Islamic identity is constructed from major components: which formulate the Muslim's mindset and shape his views towards himself, his Lord, humanity, animals, plants, and the universe at large. These components enable him to answer the most fundamental existential questions which boggle the human mind since the dawn of history. And this very approach to the revealing some of the basic aspects of humanity, animals, plants, and the universe at large. It's not a matter of, not a very easy matter. Rather, how Islamic identity is trying to question since the very beginning that the website was trying to say. So I was searching more and more. So how this mindset that Dar al Ifta al Misriya is actually saying Muslims mindset. So I found some more elaborate ideas. Muslims use the term Ummah for the worldwide community of Islam. BBC elaborates such kind of ideas too. The term means that all Muslims, regardless of where they live in the world, are all members of a worldwide faith. Yes. So I will go for with that particular faith, with that worldwide community. And to be a Muslim is to believe the Shahada and to try and live as a practicing Muslim. So now the next question is how to practice Muslim. Since the word Islam means submission. So a Muslim lives a life in submission to the will of Allah, and they try to live a life which follows the teachings of the Holy Quran. So now the next question that comes up with that, how to go for that very way of submission, how to live that very style of living that can make someone a true Muslim, the true identity of a Muslim can come up. So consulting various sources, the one particular text, the Holy Quran, is the only source where we can find some of those basic suggestions, some of those basic words revealed to all human beings, and particularly those who practice Islam. According to Quran, a Muslim is one who has absolute surrender to Allah and the commands and believes in pure Tawhid, the oneness of God. So this oneness of God, and of course there's particular faith, brotherhood, and fellow love to all humanity. These are those basic messages that you find in the Holy Quran. And that is why the Almighty has introduced Prophet Abraham as a true Muslim in the Quran, as it is written over there. I quote from one section, one surah, Al-Bukhara, and one verse 188 from the Holy Quran. How this message of peace is over there. I quote from the Holy Quran. And do not consume one another's wealth by unjust means, nor offer it as bribes to the officials in order to consume part of other people's wealth illicitly, while you know. So this very brotherhood, this very concept of justness, that is very much there, and the message is now throughout the world. But when we come to this context, in the context of India, and when Islam is coming in contact with India, it is true that this compassion, this brotherhood, the message of peace and the message of love, of course, was not there all the time. Of course, some tussles are there, some kind of clash were there, clash of ideas of there by the early invaders. Of course, these are those passages of time that we couldn't deny, that we had to face. But actually, those holy messages, those holy instructions that we find in Quran is actually through which one can be a true Muslim. Now, In the context of India, Islam is the second largest religion. A recent article by Sanjay Bhattacharjee, Indian ambassador to Turkey, uh, published in 21st September 2019, admits that very uh, position of Islam in India and how Islam is actually growing and unfurling with new possibilities, with new messages. That is very much there. Now, if we try to make this bridge, to connect this relationship between Islam and India, that is never young. Rather, history says clearly the first connection of Islam in India was far ahead, so many days ago. And we need to go back to that very 7th century, when in the Arab coastal trade routes, some of the Arabian merchants, they came in Gujarat, Kerala, and later in Bengal, and gradually the first messages of Islam came in India. Now, the point is, the first early merchants who came in India, and with them the messages of Islam, they came with that particular platform called trading. And trade is no doubt played a very key role in the early stage of Islamic spread. And the Prophet himself, with due respect to him, came from a people who had long ago established two great caravan journeys from Mecca. The winter caravan to the Yemen and the summer caravan to the outskirts of the Roman Empire. And now, at that very particular moment, when Muslim armies took over territory, the traders were there to follow them. And gradually, with them, Islam spread in the east to China, south into Africa, northwest to Europe, southeast across the Indian Ocean, and also in far countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. Now, if we talk about those early Muslim travelers who played this vital role of traveling across the globe, the first name that must come up, Ibn Battuta, and also the connection of Ibn Battuta and India. And he was one of those illustrious travelers. Actually, from Tangier, the present-day Morocco, Ibn Battuta traveled as a pilgrim, and he continued traveling 75,000 miles in 29 years. Visited West and East Africa, Arabia, India, and China. And after that span of 29 years, when his journey was over, he was back to his own country and told all those lovely, extraordinary adventure tales to the Sultan of Morocco. We find another text, Al-Hariri's text, that too recorded some of those early journeys of the Muslim merchants and how they not only traveled but also carried novel ideas of inventions and the holy messages of Islam. So it came in India gradually, and it is not such a prompt action that happened immediately. Rather, it took time. 623 Christian era, the Bardwada mosque in Gujarat, one of the early mosques in India, and Cheraman Mosque in Kerala, and Palaya Jummapalli in Tamil Nadu are other important mosques and references and evidences that connect us to those early traveler Arab merchants. And we know that gradually in the 12th century, with the invasions of the Ghuris, Islam came in India and took a permanent setup, became a part of our religion, became a part of our cultural heritage, become also gradually the assimilation of cultural assimilation took place along with food habits and other cultural assimilations. They brought with them some of the new techniques of food and some of the new cuisines hitherto unknown to the Indians. On the other hand, the indigenous people of India, indigenous food practices were revealed to the Muslims, and it was a kind of a exchange one to the other. How those exchanges took place and how Holy Quran with some brilliant messages prompted that particular practice. I would like to quote another particular verse from the Holy Quran. Worship none but Allah and be good to parents and relatives and orphans and the needy and speak nicely to people and pray regularly and give alms. Now, alms giving is one of the regular practices in Islam. Philip Wilkinson's fascinating text, Islam, that records pictorially some of the social and cultural details practiced by the Muslims, records how alms giving is a regular practice by the rich Muslim to the poor and to the society. So this sharing, this particular sharing and mixing up with the commoners are some of the ways through which there was that conglomeration. Wilkinson writes, I quote from Wilkinson's text, Islam. In some parts of India, large cooking pots or degs are used to prepare food outdoors. At the shrine of Ajmer, 2 degs are used to make food for the needy. It is interesting to note that early Muslims were salt sellers. Since salt was an essential ingredient of food, and also it helped a lot for the preservation of food, early Muslim merchants used to sell salts in high price. And they sold salt in Africa, Tagaza, that is today's Algeria, and some of the places in Africa. And selling salt, some of them became so rich, they constructed huge buildings, and caravans carried salt south. Not only they continued their business, but at the same time they spread Islam as well. So Muslim merchants, of course, are those connectors staying in a kind of a geographical space through which they were not only connected to the East Asian countries and the Far East countries, but also with Africa and with European countries. Today's food habits are the results of some of their valuable contributions, I must say. Without Muslim merchants, Europeans would have had no rice, sugar, and coffee. The Muslims brought rice from Southeast Asia and soon became popular food. They also introduced new species of fruit such as apricot into the Europe. And they are the first one to introduce and the necessity of dried foods like dates. Because dried foods could be kept for a long time and carried for months. Fresh fruit didn't travel so well. So preservation of fruits and selling the fruits was something that they found the necessity in since then. And they also valued the importance of melons. But the way apricots and dates could be preserved, melons had not that kind of opportunity. So they used to wrap it up in lid, and it was a bit beneficial for them. Along with this, use of spices are the early contributions of the Muslim merchants. We know that spices grown on the island of Indonesia that were collected from there, and those spices were introduced to the Europe, whole Europe, in Western Asia, in high prices. So the early Muslim merchants were really rich, and at the same time, these connections that they made among the people across the globe was something that was brilliant. At a time when there was no internet, no WhatsApp, no such kind of thing, but with that of tenacity and with that of, what should I say, their adventure mindedness, because of that, they could do all those things. From the time of Prophet until the 16th century, the Muslim merchants were all engaged in spice trade, bringing nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, and other spices to Arabia by sea and selling them at a profitable condition to the European traders. India and China were sources of tea. India and China were sources of tea that we all know. Rather, tea first came in China and then later in India. Coffee was grown in Yemen and some other areas. So with them, how gradually this food and culture were actually disseminating across the globe. Now, before I move further, I must consult the Holy Quran once again. It is such a huge, enriched text with lots of messages and social suggestions, I must say, that one should consult every now and then to have some of that, instructions and some of those basic information of life. I consult Surah Al-Baqarah and Ayah 61, that means verse 61. O Moses, we cannot endure one kind of food. So call to your Lord to produce for us of what the earth grows, of its herbs and its cucumbers, and its garlic, and its lentils, and its onions. So some of those early references of food in the Holy Quran reminds us that we'll find gradually how Muslim people across the globe are practicing since then to till now. Again, from the same Surah Al-Baqarah and verse 126. I quote, when Abraham said, O my Lord, make this a peaceful land and provide its people with fruits, whoever of them believes in Allah and last day. So to the Almighty, so they are requesting for a land that will be peaceful and on the other hand, provided with substantial amount of fruits. Surah Al-Maidah, verse 96, has such revealing lines. Permitted for you is the catch of sea and its food, as sustenance for you and for travelers. But forbidden for you is the game of land while you are in pilgrim sanctity. And fear Allah, to whom you will be gathered. Surah An-Nahl, verse 67. And from the fruits of date palms and grapevines you derive sugar and wholesome food. In this is a sign for people who understand. So it is really all striking, excellent, and gives a kind of a peace of mind while consulting the Holy Book, and talks a lot about the social and the cultural aspects that people of Muslim people now practice throughout the time since then to now and even today. So the food habits, of course, will get changed in course of time, that we must consult now very soon. Before the arrival of the Muslims that we have discussed or referred to already, we know that some of those aboriginals were there in India and they had their own food habits. So what kind of food habits they continued before the arrival of the Muslims? Sources show that gathering food by hunting was one of those primary practices. They ate plant products like fruits, berries, nuts, tubers. And domesticated cattle they had, sheep, goats. Indigenous plants they had like lentils, such as moong, urad, musur dal, millet, aubergines, many tubers, pumpkins, melons, gourds, mangoes, jackfruit, citrus fruit, ginger, turmeric, tamarind, and black and long pepper. These are those indigenous fruits and some of the basic ingredients available in India. So that will help us to know how food habits are getting modified after the arrival of the Muslims. Later we find some modifications came. Development of practice of wheat cultivation, barley, grapes, red lentils, peas, linseed, and dates. Rice also was cultivated. Cereals were ground into flour and mixed with pulse, flour to make what may have been the ancestors of the typical South Indian foods that we have today, idli, vada, and dosa. So these are not new at all. Rather, some of those early people of India, since then to till now, idli, vada, and dosa are available. Now, if we consult some early people, like Indus Valley people, they had the buffalo milk and preparation of clarified butter and yogurt. Seafood were plenty. Bread was staple of Indus Valley diet. More than 200 varieties are listed in ancient Mesopotamian variety existed in Indus civilization too. After them came the Aryans and a kind of a civilization, mostly agriculture based. Rice was raised in that very rainy season, harvested on the winter. At the same time, they had dal, lentils, beans, and peas, and so many things. So these are the ways people were having their food habits during that time. Some other secondary sources like Greek ambassador Megasthenes, his observations in the famous text Indica can give us some very valuable inputs here. How millet was actually available, fruits were also available, and Megasthenes was there to write down how fruits grew spontaneously, vegetables thrived on the river banks all the time. Megasthenes was actually astonished, amazed for a particular kind of reeds, tall reeds. I quote from Indica, tall reeds which are sweet both by nature and by concoction. He was actually referring to sugarcane. That sugarcane that was till then was unknown to the Europeans. But the food habits had a serious changes, and the kind of cross-examination, mutual, exchange took place after the Muslim invasion. And it came once again referring to those Arabian merchants who came Kerala and Malabar coast. Pistachio and asafoetida are the two of those necessary Indian ingredients that were introduced to the Indians for the first time. Since the time of Taimur to Babur, we know that these food habits are gradually getting developed as time moved on. Even today, present-day Maharashtra and Gujarat still use the dissolving asafoetida in water, and they make it useful in their preparation while cooking. And during the Mughal period, it was on the very high time. It was on that very pinnacle of experimentations with certain basic modifications and changes in the cuisine. Before I move to that very Mughal and other traditions, I would like to mention some of the significant changes that took place soon after the arrival of the Muslims in India. Use of many fresh and dry fruits in cooking style. Before the arrival of the Muslims, such kind of technique was not available, because the use of dry fruits in the preparation of food were not very popular, were not at all in practice even. But with them came the use of dry fruits. Use of dairy products in Indian cookery for enrichment of this. They also, Muslims, after their arrival in India, learned from that Indian basic cookery and the kind of system, and included dairy products, and enrichment of the dish took place. Among many additions to food, Jalebi, which is still in practice, was a kind of an invention and very popular since that time to even today. Another thing, it is a kind of a food practice, I must say, sharing of food with near and dear ones, even to the unknown people. This hospitality is one of the virtues in Islam, especially in desert area, from where actually it began. Food is very difficult to prepare, collect. So I would like to refer one particular illustration available in Wilkinson's text that I referred earlier. In that illustration, it is clearly shown how in a Persian family, they are sharing their food with a stranger. This kind of fellow feeling, this kind of sharing mentality to the people in general is something, some of the holy messages which are found repeatedly in Holy Quran. So it is very much clear that 1225 is that particular landmark in the history of India that Islamic rule became fixed, and for the next 300 years until then continued different sultanate dynasties one after another, and along with them came the changes in social and the cultural practices. We had the sultan of the slave dynasties, the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, the Lodhis, and so many. And I must name two of them. One is already mentioned, one is Ibn Battuta, another one is Amir Khusro. Now, Ibn Battuta's record in Tahqiq-i-Hind, some of the observations of Ibn Battuta can be found over there that took place in the court of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Now, since then, we find another important feature, lavishness and grandeur in daily food practice. Because on the part of the Sultan, it was a kind of a matter of prestige. This very lavishness was necessary. Fruits, taking fruits was one of those very favorite genre of the Mughals. But before I start the Mughal emperors, I must refer to Jahiruddin Muhammad Babur. The Babur means lion. And Babur was very popular for his Babur Nama. And Amitabh Ghosh, the famous Indian writers in English, in one of his collection of essays that was in Bangla, and the name of the collection is Bhromi Bishoy, has talked a lot about Babur Nama, and he gave the credit that Babur should be considered as the first or the early autobiography writer. Now, Babur himself was a poet too. When Babur was leaving his own province, Farghana, because he was attacked by his cousins, now he had no other choice but to leave his own place and to come near India. So, some beautiful passages in the Babur Nama can be found where he gives the description of nature, and later he talked about his food habits in the same Babur Nama. But somehow the kind of food available then during the time of Babur, it didn't convince him. And Babur was there to say, Hindustan is a place of little charm. I quote from Babur Nama. And Babur was grumbling in the autobiography. I quote from Babur Nama, there is no good flesh, no grapes or muskmelons, no good fruits, no good bread or food in the bazars. Because Babur couldn't forget the luxury of food he experienced earlier in Farghana. And he gives one of the examples of the luxury that he had once upon a time in Farghana. The pheasants get extremely fat. He was talking of that very pheasants. It is said that not even 4 people can finish eating a stew made from just one. Pomegranates and apricots are superb. One type of pomegranate is called big seed, the sweetness of which has something of the taste of an overripe apricot. Historian Lizzie Collingham's text in Curry, A Tale of Cooks and Conquerors, deals a lot about the Mughal habits and their food practices. But after being settled in India, Lizzie Collingham writes that towards the end of his life, Babur discovered that it was possible to cultivate grapes and melons in India. So it is of no problem then. Rather, one can have melons in Indian place, and it would not be very difficult to cultivate grapes and melons together. So the kind of blankness in mind Babur had because of not having proper kind of fruits in India, it was gradually minimized. Another significant name in respect to food habit that must come is no other than Humayun, second Mughal emperor. And we know it well that Humayun had to take shelter in Persian province due to the emergence of Sher Shah. Now, when the particular period was over, Collingham writes that Humayun brought a large number of Persian cooks and imported them all in India with some of their Persian cuisines, and again there was a mixture with the Indian food practice. It was the time hing became very popular with the vegetarians in the country, India. It was cooked in oil, and when it was mixed with oil with a garlicky flavor, it substituted the provisions of onions and garlic, because devout Hindus avoided the use of onions and garlic. So hing was a kind of a replacement. So that was a kind of an advancement of food practice during the time of Humayun. Another one is that very popularization of khichdi. So khichdi was a kind of a food practice we find since then. And not only that, with Humayun, it also went to the Persian province. Another significant thing that I must have to say in respect to Humayun's practices is that he fell in love with the mangoes, and particularly where I am right now at Malda. Now, Malda was then known as Gour, the present day Malda. Gour was then, and the mango, as it is popular, in Humayun's time it was similarly popular. And Humayun was really convinced with the taste of mangoes, and he renamed Malda Gour then as Jannatabad, the garden of heaven. But such kind of early experiments would not withstand in front of that very lavish presentation of food by greatest of Mughals, Akbar. His Aini Akbari is a collection of all those brilliant dishes and cuisines that his Prime Minister Abul Fazal meticulously pointed out, noted down. In section 24 of Aini Akbari, we find some of the dishes available in Akbar's court. And in Ain Akbari, Abul Fazl referred to different groups of foods. First of all, the first group of food had no meat at all. Such kind of foods were categorized kufiana. The 10 popular dishes, jard birinj, khuska, khichdi, sir birinj, thuli, chikhi, badinanj, pahit, sag and halwa. Among all these, jat birinj, sir birinj, thuli and halwa were basically sweet. Pahit made with dal, ghee and salt, meant to be eaten with khuska, that was made with rice from dejira and jinjin paddy and with salt and nothing else. Sag is said to be one of the most pleasant dishes in his time. Aini Akbari is so meticulous, it refers everything. The book says that jart birinj can be made sweet and without meat, or salt without meat. 10 shades of rice for jart birinj is said to give 4 ordinary dishes. Probably means that each dish is to be shared among several people. So once again, the reference of sharing food to the other, one of the messages that we find in the Holy Quran. It probably means that sharing food with fellow people would give a kind of an intimacy that the Mughals really needed. And of course, the cultural exchange. Rice, ground wheat, flour, split dal, gram are the major ingredients of the dishes. And once again, the food practice of the dried fruits, raisin, almonds, pistachio are mentioned. And along with that, probably the period of the time was so pure because we cannot even think or imagine of such kind of oily materials which are mentioned in Ain Akbari. Ghee, fresh ginger, lime juice, saffron, cinnamon, round pepper, coriander seeds, cloves, cardamom, cumin seeds, and asafoetida. Sugar candy is the only sweetener mentioned by name. So this is how the first group of foods are mentioned. And what were the second group of foods? That mixes rice and meat. The next list of dishes that mixes rice and meat were kubali, Just Biryani, Keema Pulao, Sula, Bughra, Keema Surba, Harisha, Kask, Halim, and Kutab. The source of meat is not specified, but regarding the ingredients that we have already mentioned above, now one has to include onion, garlic, and vinegar so that it will be more spicy. Along with that, fresh vegetables are to be included. Carrots, beets, turnips, spinach added to the meat and flour in making the bughra. Fennel and flavoring agent called sumak are also mentioned. It is said that the people of Hindustan have the name sanbusa for kutab, and it can be cooked in 20 different ways. The measures show that spices were used sparingly in the imperial kitchen. Kutab involves 10 shades of meat, 4 shades of flour, 2 shades of ghee, 1 shade of onion, a quarter shade of fresh ginger, half a shade of salt, 2 dams of pepper, coriander, cumin seed, cardamom, cloves, and others. So this unbelievable preparation that we can only imagine in our time. And the third group of dishes that we had then were only meat. Biryan, yakhi, ulma, kebab, musamman, do piyaj, mutanzana, damfukt, kwala, and malguba. So the kind of references we often find in restaurant that this is a Mughal dish is actually a shadow of that time. So you cannot even imagine, one cannot even imagine the kind of food they had and the kind of shadow of the shadow we get in our time. Aini Akbari lists the ingredients for biryan. Wholesome Dasmandi sheep with 2 shades of salt, 1 share of ghee and 2 misquals of saffron, cloves, pepper and cumin seeds. Specified meats are sheep, lamb, kids and fowls. And for all the references, we are indebted to K.T. Achaya, his brilliant text on the history of food of India that encompass all those valuable references. And he also mentions that quail, pheasant and other wildfowl appeared on the Mughal tables. Most of these are cooked in ghee, but fat trimmed from the meat is prescribed for do piyaja and mutanzana. Kebabs are said to be of various kinds. The Malguva calls for equal measures of meat and curds. So for the first time, we are also introduced that in Mughal time, meat and curds are actually mixed together, and the references of curd can be found for the first time. Now, if we sum up some of those early references, then we find the new kind of dish that came into existence during the Mughal, and it only happened because of those presence of Muslim in India. Sharbat is one of those. Sharbat is a kind of a drink made from fruit juice or extracts of flowers or herbs combined with sugar and water. Muslim advent in the second millennium that brought different kind of sharbat, flavored with essences like rose and other herbs. Samosa or sambuska, a triangular pastry filled mainly with minced meat and dry nuts and deeply fried. The samosa we have right now, we don't have the minced meat we don't have inside it. Rather, in few samosas we find some, onions and other ingredients are stuffed. Shingara, I think, is another version. Amir Khusru describes how in Delhi, samosa was very popular and prepared from meat, ghee, onion, mixing together and stuffing it inside it. Halwa is an Arabic word and first used in English denoted a Turkish confection of ground sesame seeds and honey. In India, it denotes sweet made of wheat, vermicelli, fruits, vegetables, or nuts. We have another very popular one, faluda, blending of the milk or cream with the straining of boiled wheat, gelatinous seed granules, and sometimes fruit juices. Halim, a dish of Middle Eastern origin, is a porridge of grain and meat made up of spicy mix of keema and broken wheat. It was very famous in the, during those Muslim dynasties. Kulfi included Indian food by Mughals, originated from a metal cone in which it was prepared with thickened milk with nuts and saffron. Kulfi, since then, even today, are very good, very popular. Jalebi is something that we have already referred to. Spiral, dried, fermented batter soaked in a sugary syrup. Then it is fried and crispiness comes up and again steeped in a very thick syrup. Jalebi is a Arabic word, jalabia, from where it is derived. Biryani, that we all know, one of those lovely preparations, and in Aine Akbari, extensive description how to prepare biryani is clearly mentioned. Naan, baked bread, also a very popular Muslim bread prepared, and it was, refined flour, and it was baked in an oven. And during the Mughal rule, such kind of naans were available as a breakfast. Kofta, sirmal, harissa, do piaja, burani, some of the early, you know, miracles, I must say, miracles in the history of food. And now if we consult any standard uh, reference guide, or any standard, restaurant leaflet, where we have all those, dishes available right now, then we can make a kind of a balance, a kind of a parallel, how or those references of those Muslim dynasties and the food habits are still very much present. And in the pan-Indian condition, it is coming up in a kind of a new shade. I would like to conclude referring two things, two texts actually in my name. One is Din Muhammad. Din Muhammad is basically considered as a person, and is read often his text, The Travels of Din Muhammad, the first Indian writer in English. Din Muhammad traveled a lot, actually from Patna, Bihar, and Din Muhammad later settled down in London. But this Din Muhammad is credited with the first restaurant in London. And as it is a kind of a custom for the great contribution to the society and the culture, Din Muhammad's first Indian restaurant in London, with a kind of a credit of a plaque that this is the first Indian restaurant that was set up by Din Muhammad. And Din Muhammad actually could offer the very typical Indian flavor to all the people of London then. And Din Muhammad's that curry, the ingredients and the masala were actually so popular, people became fan of him and his dishes. So this is how this I must say, the level of pan-Indianness is crossing the limit. It's getting global actually. So I am just breaking my own barrier. So no pan-India anymore. Rather, we are breaking that barrier, that Indian flavor, a kind of a mutual exchange, indigenous and the Muslims. Now the kind of flavor that Din Muhammad actually offered to the people is a kind of a global phenomenon. Another one I must mention, that was Mr. Abdul Karim. Now, who was Abdul Karim? Abdul Karim was the Munshi of Queen Victoria. And recently there was a text and also a movie, Queen Victoria and Abdul. Now, this aged Queen Victoria, who was so isolated, alone in her own palace. Now, this Agra-based Abdul Munshi was the companion of Queen Victoria. This Munshi spent a lot of time with Queen Victoria. They had a very good conversation, almost like a mother and a son relationship. Queen Victoria loved Abdul Karim very much, and Abdul offered some of those Indian curry and the dishes again to Queen Victoria, and Queen Victoria loved Indian flavor so much. So I would like to conclude, pan-Indianness is not only a word, rather, it is practically true. And I would like to conclude my presentation with a sentence: food has actually no religion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Sarkar. I mean, the only thing I can say after listening to such an enriching and fabulous talk is that I'm hungry at the moment.
That's the great gift for me also.
Because the number of food dishes you have listed, it's amazing. The kind of span you have covered is just mind-boggling. Uh, it also reminds me of another book, actually, of a novelist,
Yes.
Andale Wajid. She's based in
Mhm.
Bangalore. She's one of the younger writers, younger generation, right, Muslim writers in India. She has a book
Mhm.
called More Than Just Biryani, and it is in the form of a food war, that is food memoir. So
Mhm.
she's tracing three generations of Muslim family based in Vellore and later in Bangalore, and then in Hong
Mhm.
Kong. The last
Okay.
generation moves to Hong Kong. So three
Mhm.
generations. So this last generation, the girl in Hong Kong, she recreates the dishes. She learned from her mother and grandmother. So it kind of reminds me with the texture of food that you described. It almost came alive, in Andali Wajid's case as well.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
so rich. The
Thank
texture
you.
is so rich.
Thank
So
you. Thank you.
yep, I would not take much trouble, summing up this rich talk, though when I was speaking at the beginning of this lecture, I was coming from a very different perspective. I was coming from more from the point of view of food as a cultural memory, food as a site of politics in contemporary India, especially beef
Mhm.
politics. But
Mm.
I think what Professor Sarkar has managed to do is steer clear of these, minefields we call food politics at this very moment in India. He has taken
Mhm.
us somewhere which is not at all about food politics, but about the rich cultural heritage that Muslims have left in this country over the centuries. So he started
Yes.
with the yes, he started with the concept of ummah. I'm just briefly summing up what he said in his lecture. Professor Sarkar started with the notion of ummah. Of course, as we know, ummah is a transnational Muslim community because Islam doesn't believe in nation. In that it is so much like Marxism because we always Muslims have always believed in a kind of supranationalism and not the boundaries of nation where religion could sort of unite. Though it's a myth, we all know it. The kind of divisions that exist between Muslims, especially the Arab world and non-Arab Muslims, it becomes a kind of myth to think of at the moment. But still, he started with certain basic elements. What could be defined, or what could be the defining elements of Muslim identity? Shahada, the kalma that we all
Yes.
read to become Muslims. So, especially when someone is becoming Muslim from non-Muslim religion, he talked about Tawheed, the oneness of God, and I think that's the founding principle. If we deny that, we are not Muslim. And also, he talked about the notion of brotherhood, the message of peace, and then he went on to talk about very fascinatingly what these early Muslims did as travelers and business people. So very often we understand or we think Muslims came to India just as invaders, which is not the case. Muslims came to India from the Arab world. We know they came to Kerala much earlier, as Professor Sarkar has mentioned already, in the 7th century. They were building the mosque in Gujarat, in Kerala, and in Tamil Nadu. And it's not very difficult to see why, because they came as traders. So the coast, they came along the coast, the coastal routes were followed, and that's how they came to these places. So they started off with, he mentioned also Al-Harari's book about Muslim travelers. So these Muslims came and they started selling salt, one of the important ingredients in food, and they were bringing something that was not available at the time, like apricot, other dried food, melons, spices. These are things that were not available at the time in India. So these were things that Muslim traders were trading in, and as a result, Along with Muslim invasion in the 12th century, we also see cultural assimilation that he points out and new food practices. That is important. So from the beginning, the way he's situating in his talk, the contribution of Muslims to food in the Indian subcontinent, as well as, as far as Indonesia and Malaysia, all those lands, that Muslims came as if they came as messengers of food in some ways. I mean, that's the idea I take away from his talk in one way to look at it. And then he says how I don't remember actually, I'm sorry. He mentions so many types of food that it's almost impossible for me to get into the detail. It's only possible for a researcher who is actually doing this, such a rich description of food items and names of food, which is not possible for me to remember at this moment. I'll just point out the broad idea in his talk, in the second part of his talk. He says that Indians followed a particular kind of indigenous food habit Indians had before the Muslims came to this country. Once Muslims came, before that, indigenous people, whom we call Adivasis today, or we can also include not just Adivasis, I would say even Aryan people. Of course, they had come much before the Muslims. If we take Aryan invasion to be a form of invasion, of course. So they were, they had the indigenous fruits, they had millet, which was grown in India at the time. But what Muslims brought with them was dry food, which could last longer, which was not available. And as he said, in the cultural exchange, Muslims started adopting dairy products, which was not there before, in Muslim food habit. Probably that's one of the reasons, because cows or other forms of cattle were not available in that kind of number where these Muslim rulers came from. They came from dry land, after all, Of course, they came from Persia without denying, but they also came from, if you see, the whole of Central Asia, which is dry region in certain ways. It may be good for growing melons. It may not be good for, rearing cattle. So there is a climatic reason always why people choose certain kinds of food and they do not have access to other kinds of food. And dry food also, again, the reason could be much of, the Middle Eastern region had they could grow that kind of fruit which could be dried and then sold over a period of time. Now, along with this kind of detailing of food, we also see a kind of lavishness and grandeur. I think that's what our Hindu friends always associate with Muslims. I have always seen the kind of interest I find when I'm home, that please invite me for Eid. We want to come to your house and eat. Because they have this inherent notion in their mind, the kind of grandeur that Muslim food is associated with. And that's where the question of stereotype also comes in, what we have been talking about, right? And also the notion that one could share food with others, with the less fortunate ones, with one's neighbors, with friends, with family, extended family, with villagers. I mean, this idea, again, derives, as Professor Sarkar has pointed out, from the idea of brotherhood in Islam. So if you have to understand food culture in Islam, we also need to understand Islam as such. The certain cultural notions that are embedded in the religion itself, where it's coming from. And I'll also add, Professor Sarkar had briefly mentioned that it also comes from a very Bedouin notion of, in the Arab world, living together through harsh conditions where sharing would had to become a part of life. And that's why I make a distinction in Indian Muslim between the Persian influence and the Arab influence. There are two kinds of Islam in India. If we see, forget about the sectarian divide. Even largely speaking, the Kerala Muslim is the Arab-inspired Islam. Whereas in North India, we have more Persian-inspired Islam. And Arab Islam is more egalitarian. The sharing is very much a part of that spirit. Whereas Persian Islam, I don't know, that's my understanding, is much more, I would say, hierarchical, because Persian culture was already a highly developed hierarchical culture. Any developed culture is hierarchical. If we see, the less developed, quote unquote, less developed cultures are more, we will say, sharing, more egalitarian in certain ways. Arab culture was never in that sense a rich culture the way the Persian culture was, right? That's my own understanding. I could be wrong. So we had this notion of grandeur, lavishness, and, sharing at the same time. And he ended with these examples of these great Mughals who came and who were not initially happy. Babur was, of course, not happy. Even I remember this line from Baburnama, which you quoted. It was not a very hospitable land at all. India was not a hospitable land. And who would have thought that people who didn't find the land hospitable spent so many centuries in this land and made it their home. That's also amazing. That what, the cultural exchanges and the give and take that can influence one's decisions finally to settle or not anywhere. And this influence was not one-way traffic, as Professor Sarkar also mentioned. Khichdi was something that was taken from India to Persia, right? And this practice of cooking meat in rice. And someone had a question here, of course, would like to hear from Professor Sarkar on that. When was biryani? How did biryani come into being? I mean, there are a lot of theories on that, This is one of the dishes where we cook rice, meat with rice, of course, together we cook. So that's one of the points that we'll like to hear. Now, finally, the talk actually, very interestingly, left India and went on to England. And it almost covered, it covered transnational geography, transnational spaces. And Professor Sarkar ended with two prominent examples, which today we talk about a lot, Bin Muhammad and Abdul Karim. One was known as one of the earliest restaurateurs, Indian Muslim restaurateurs in Britain. The other one was also a personal companion of Queen Victoria, sorry. And we also know that there's this the film that Professor Sarkar was mentioning. It does portray a romance between Abdul Karim and Victoria. So there's this angle of romance. And this space of romance can encapsulate food and other forms of affective dimensions as it happens. Now, I would end here. I would say that this was a fascinating talk in the sense, the kind of detail that he got us here. That was amazing. My only question would be at this moment, you don't have to answer it now. You can answer it, after all the questions are taken. But still, if India had such a rich Muslim influence in its food habit, if there was a cultural osmosis happening between Muslims and the indigenous population in India, why do we see then that a ruler like Akbar banning, cattle slaughter? In fact, he had prohibited cattle slaughter, cow slaughter, because he wanted peace. So we never get into the point then of conflict. We only remain within the constraint of amity. I mean, that's a noble intention, of course, that's a different kind of study. But it just seeing the contemporary moment in India, it just makes me ask this question, that is it because that we have forgotten the contribution of Muslims to Indian food habit that we just do not acknowledge anymore their presence? And that's why we have this kind of political contestation between Hindus and Muslims especially on two counts, as we know, In medieval India, they had a code of ethics in which they said, we can share everything with the other religion except for two things, roti and beti, food and women. We are not going to share these two things with the other religion, that is Islam. Except for that, everything can be shared. Everything can be, talked about. Okay, so my question, as I said, the point of contestation. So if we have a talk of this kind, retrieval of a Muslim history, which is almost forgotten now in contemporary India, what does it really do to our idea of contemporary conflict? Or what can it do to alleviate conflict at this very moment? Much of the conflict we see again over beef and food and stuff like that, right? So I end with that. You don't have to take the question necessarily now. And I just hand over the session to the organizers for collating questions and asking questions. And also, sorry, before I go, I wanted to mention this particular book, which I had reviewed also. There's this book called Sudipta Mitra's book, Pearl by the River, and it was on Nawab Wajid Ali Shah from Lucknow, who was exiled to Calcutta. And what today we have Chota Lucknow in Calcutta, Khidirpur in that area, people have forgotten about it mostly. He brought all these thousands of people with him. He was living on a pension from the British government of 1 lakh or 10 lakh per year. So he recreated Lucknow in Khidirpur in that area. And he brought in today what we know as the biryani culture to Calcutta. Because it is often said that because his pension was low and he had so many retainers with him whom he had to feed, that they had to invent something, and they started putting potato in biryani to make up for the lack of meat. That's a tragic for a man like Wajid Ali Shah, that kind of, we can say, patron of culture and whatnot, literature. and who had to end up in this fashion. So this is another book, fascinating book on food. I found a lot of description about food in Khidirpur area when Wajid Ali Shah was exiled to Calcutta. So thank you very much once more. I really, really learned a lot from your talk. And I just hand over now to the organizers to get the questions.
Thank you, Professor.
Abid, question go bolo.
আরে আমি দেখতে পাচ্ছি না কারণ I had to go away from this meeting. There was some problem with my phone, so just scroll up and see there are some questions, so please ask those.
The very last question I can see on my screen is from one C.A. Arya, and the question is, what is the origin of biryani in India?
Origin of biryani in India. Okay. So no doubt, once again, a very interesting question. And I referred that biryani, no doubt, it has so many debates how it was actually originated in India. The consultation of my several books and texts by this, recent time, biryani, one part is that biryani was there, or a little version of that was very much there in India before the Islam came. But it was actually perfected, modified, and the kind of version that we find today, it was the gift of that very after the Muslim came in India, and through the Mughals, actually this very perfection is there. And of course the color of biryani, the color that we find, that very yellowish color, these are the later date modifications, and the modifications actually came through the Mughals. But it is a long process, because another book, Bengali book that I consulted, Khachi Kintu Janiki, this very excellent book talks a lot about how biryani could be prepared. But once again the question is very much there, how and when it was originated in India. No one can say, because food, every food is the essence of a long practice, and the modification, the version we find today, people of 21st century or people who are listening today, the kind of food we find in our home, in our restaurant, in other places, actually it is a long modification. So the origin is difficult to trace, and numerous writers are there. No one can say directly that, but two separate versions are there. One is before the Islam came, a little bit of version of biryani was there, mixing that very food, rice and the meat. But that actual, that flavor and the color that we find today, it was obviously the contribution of the Mughals.
If I may add very briefly to this.
Yes.
I think, also we read some accounts where we find that biryani was not, it was not a high profile dish the way we understand it today. It had what we call, quote unquote, a very humble origin. It originated mostly in the army barracks, where soldiers were looking for a quick fix. Very often, that's one version of the story, where soldiers were looking for a quick fix, and they immediately had to, they cooked rice and meat together. That's how it actually started, many of them say. The kind of refined version that we find, that came much, much later. That's one way of, looking at it. Yep. Okay, next, let's see what sort of question we have.
Next question is, don't you think that food identity with a particular religion like Islam is common from the time of Crusades, as we see the connection of grano Saraceno with Saraceno was a common terminology used by the papal authority. Within brackets, later on, Christian rulers follow it as a tool in Indian subcontinent for the division of Hindu and Muslim sects.
Actually, my answer to this particular question is that, as Professor Musharraf Khan has pointed out rightly, I think that I have deliberately, this against this kind of divisions of the Hindu and Muslim, and the kind of he was also asking me question on the beef politics. So this beef politics and this kind of questions, I have one single answer is that in a recent talk in another college, I recently referred to Slavoj Žižek's recent text on pandemic, and Zizek was referring to Hegel there, that we learn from history, we read history to learn, but the irony is that we actually don't learn from history. So the very same thing is that the rich heritage that Islam had in India, because they were brilliant. In my last talk in a particular college on pandemic, I'm referring it here in case of food history, only because that there too I referred regarding pandemic or during plague. Once again, the Muslim scholars also referred to particular signs, particular predictions. Something wrong is there happening around. So their contribution in Europe, their contribution in any other place, and obviously in India was optimum. But once again, the very same reference is that we don't learn from history, as we forget history deliberately, or we don't have intention to read history in that way. Which are the reasons of the present day clash, cattle debates, beef debates, and so many. So we have two different kind of policies. Either we can get into debates, or we can again go back to the past and then reread the text and to modify a kind of such a kind of theory or a kind of a belief system that in Holy Quran is mentioned, in Holy Quran it is mentioned, and we can also make a kind of a society that can put away all those so-called divisions and the distinctions. Rather go for something holy, rather go for something full of brotherhood and full of fellow feeling. So my point is that this is my take, and I deliberately try to not to go for all those divisions. These are the policies some people are going for, that only because either they are politically motivated or they don't have that kind of tendency to go back to the past and to read the rich history that this both culture once upon a time had. Regarding this question of crusade, once again the very papal authority and the Christian ruler. Now my recent reading on Holy Quran I am reading for a long time actually, but for this presentation I had to go back once again. Once again I find that how they are of course giving credit to Jesus as Isha. Isha was once upon a time there, and one of the prophets, and then Prophet Muhammad is one last one, no doubt. In spite of all those things and the kind of Indian subcontinent and the division of Hindu and Muslim, once again is that's very religious divisions and food habit. Yes, it was very much there, no doubt, but these are those again politically motivated conditions that I didn't take actually for my deliberation today. I sincerely avoided and would avoid also. So that is my take on those particular questions.
Okay, next question is what kind of an impact did Muslims have on vegetarian diet and culinary habits in India?
Okay, fine. Impact of, once again the question, is the question there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any profound contributions to vegetarian diet and culinary in India?
So the question is, did Muslims contribute anything to the vegetarian diet and culinary in India?
Before the Muslims came, of course, the majority was on the vegetarian food. And once again, I would like to remind my dear audience that the 3 stages of Aini Akbari and the detailing of the food habits, one of the kind of food was simply vegetarian, Akbar too also maintained the kind of respect to the people that, okay, those who would like to be vegetarian, I have full respect for them. And we have also mentioned in our presentation that the introduction of hing, because it was a kind of a substitute of onion and garlic. Those devout Hindus who didn't like to have onions and garlics, they can have hing in there as an ingredient of the dish. So, of course, modifications came, vegetarian food and new modifications. After the arrival of the Muslims, food became more spicy. Early food were never so spicy. But those who wanted to have this new kind of taste, that was welcome for them. But in Aini Akbari, we found that those who preferred vegetarian, for vegetarian people, of course, such choices were left, and it was never such kind of imposition.
We don't have any more questions.
No, no,
So
we have. I found one question, which is, what is the Muslim influence on food in Bengal and Northeast food habits?
Okay. Regarding Northeast, I didn't found much, but in Bengal, of course, Professor Khan has also, referred to that very biryani and the reference of biryani, because and the potato in the biryani. Regarding potato, I have one thing to add. The potato actually is the result of the Portuguese. In one of my early lectures, I said potato and colonialism has a very good connection. Now, those who are having potato, by dint of having potato, you will get accustomed to it, and the body structure prone to gaining weight will come up to you, and the kind of before taking potato and after taking potato, two very different physical construction would actually put you in the trouble, and will make you lethargic, and as a colonized people, of course, it will be a hindrance for you to be more physically and mentally and psychologically strong enough to fight against the colonizer. So such kind of versions I found somewhere regarding potato, and all other versions that we found elsewhere. In Bengal too, inclusion of biryani and all food habits. I do take on regular semui. Somehow, not only any particular Muslim festival, rather I take it every week throughout the year. So food habits in Bengal too also very much influenced, and once again it was a mutual exchange in both cases.
Is there any other question?
yeah, there is a particular question, but I don't think it is relevant to Bengal. There is Thalassery biryani popular in Bengal? I think the answer is no.
I think that's not relevant for this talk anyways. So yeah, we can move on. Is there any other question?
Yeah. We heard about past food habits, how Muslim rulers influenced food habits. I want to know, is there any change in food habits after independence, or any new food habits developed after independence?
Okay. Thank you, Shoshti, and thank you for your question. My answer on your question will be that after independence, as it is the global phenomenon, so food habits are actually getting changed, and no doubt early food habits are there. Now, street food is one of those food habits. I also found in some of those brilliant texts how street foods is not only in Muslim countries, rather in India too. Street food is that very recent changes. and how modifications, kebab, and modifications of various other dishes are also coming up. People are also very experimental to make new modifications. I would like to give one that is not connected to Muslim food. For example, I stay in Malda, and we know all that due to health reasons and for other reasons, we need to move. Everyone in India has to move, throughout different places. For example, we often go for treatment in the South India. Now dosa, the dosa in South India, the kind of taste, dosa at Malda has a different kind of taste. And I have tested it seriously, the kind of ingredients they put in, and when I ask them, so I find a different kind of dosa here at Malda. Why? The reason is the very same. People are making experiments on food every day. So after independence, the kind of questions you have put here. So my answer is that all those modifications, biryani at Malda is a place where I found different kind of biryanis. In each and every shop, they have a different taste. I often visit to Hyderabad, and I love Hyderabad not only for treatment, I love Hyderabad for biryanis too. And each and every biryani in a shop, I find different kind of taste. So they are making modifications with new ingredients. So after independence, food is a kind of a cultural habit, and that will go on actually. People go on doing new kind of things. So is in the case of biryani and other foods, of course. So the kind of dosa I referred to just now, not only independence, even today, new modifications are coming up every day. And it will go on actually.
Maybe we can close it now, or maybe just take just one more question and then close
You
it.
mentioned about many foods that came to India from alien land. So my question is how Indian people react and accustom with foreign food. Okay, it is actually, we have no choice, my dear Ekramul Haq. Indian people had, of course, their aboriginal food habits. I mentioned there. We had those, red, black pepper, and in Bangla we often call jhinge. In English, it is sponge gourd. These are those indigenous food. But when the foreigners came in India, you are mentioning the foreign food. We had green chili. It is not an indigenous, material. We had also a potato, just referred to from Portuguese. We had also tomato from Spain. So La Tomatina is the favorite, festival there every year. So with the rulers, you have no choice. One is that either by dint of you have to accustom to that very changes brought by the foreigners, or you can stick to your very own indigenous materials. Now it is not generally seen actually. I have two examples. One is the tea. Recently I am working on tea practices in India. Now before tea came, Indian people actually detested tea. They didn't like tea. It is that very promotion by the British, and it will be astonished knowing that. I hope you know also that Indian to the commoners of India, to the Kolkata people, they often promoted that this is the kind of a drink that will make you warm during winter and make you cold during summer season. Now people had no choice. Now they are offering tea everyone. They are offering tea free of cost. Indian Railway offering tea free of cost at that very time. And every street corners in Kolkata, because that was the capital of the Britain, the English East India Company then. So in India, in Kolkata, tea was free of cost. People were getting used to that very tannin, and gradually they fell into it. So the point of accustoming is very much there. You have two choices, Ekramul. One is you can have it or you cannot have it. So this is the very common tendency of human being to get accustomed to that very new thing. Newness, we love new. We can resist for a while, but ultimately we'll move for it in a particular period of time. And so foreign foods are now adopted by us. And we are all, we are having porridge and we are having a different kind of pasta we are having right now, actually from Italy. Uh, when our near and dear ones are having, our friends are having, we gradually are becoming curious to it, and then we are adopting it as our own. So is my answer to you.
Okay, so I think, we won't take any more questions. Thank you so much, Professor Sarkar, once again, for a very, very
Thank you,
enriching
sir.
lecture. And we'll now
Thank you,
hand
sir.
over the session to the organizers.
Thank you, Professor Khan and Professor Sarkar. Now I would request Shomi Akhtar, who is pursuing PhD in astrophysics, in the Department of Mathematics, Jadavpur University, to deliver the formal vote of thanks. Shomi Akhtar, over to you.
Yes. বেসের পক্ষ থেকে আমি শমী আক্তার, বেসের একজন কার্যনির্বাহী সদস্য। এই ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন পর্বে আমি সর্বপ্রথম যাদের কৃতজ্ঞতা স্বীকার করতে চাইব তারা হলেন এই সংগঠনের কার্যনির্বাহী সদস্যগণ। তাদের অক্লান্ত পরিশ্রম এবং সদিচ্ছা ছাড়া এই আলোচনা সভা করা সম্ভব হতো না। অসংখ্য শুকরিয়া জানাই হাসান ভাই, শাহিন ভাই, নার্গিস ম্যাম এবং কাইফিয়া ম্যামকে সমস্ত রকম টেকনিক্যাল সাপোর্ট দেওয়ার জন্য। ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন করতে চাইব আজকের সভার সভাপতি সম্মানীয় ডক্টর মোশাররফ হোসাইন খান মহাশয়কে। তিনি আমাদের শুরুতেই ব্যক্তিগত অভিজ্ঞতা থেকে কিছু কথা শুনিয়েছেন, যা খুবই বাস্তব। বিশেষভাবে ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন করতে চাই আজকের প্রভাষক, সম্মানীয় অতিথি, মাননীয় অধ্যাপক সবুজ সরকার মহাশয়কে, আমাদের ডাকে সাড়া দেওয়ার জন্য, আমাদের আলোকিত করার জন্য। মহাশয় আমাদের অবগত করেছেন মুসলিম খাদ্যের ইতিহাস সম্পর্কে, পৃথিবীর বিভিন্ন প্রান্ত থেকে খাদ্য কিভাবে আমাদের দেশে, এমনকি আমাদের দৈনিক খাদ্যাভ্যাসে এসেছে সে সম্পর্কে অবহিত করেছেন, যা আমরা বাস্তব জীবনে অনুভব করতে পারি। আশা করি সম্মানীয় শ্রোতাগণ আজকের আলোচনা শুনে জ্ঞানদীপ্ত হয়েছেন। আমি আরো ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন করতে চাইব বেসের সহযোগী সদস্যদের এবং যারা বেসের সদস্য নয় তাদেরও। ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন করতে চাইব সকল শ্রোতাদের যাদের উপস্থিতি আমাদের অনুপ্রাণিত করে এই ধরনের আলোচনা সভা আয়োজন করতে। আপনাদের সমর্থন একান্ত কাম্য। মাননীয় কার্যনির্বাহী সদস্যগণ, মাননীয় সভাপতি মোশাররফ খান মহাশয়, মাননীয় প্রভাষক সবুজ সরকার মহাশয়, মাননীয় সহকারী সদস্যগণ, মাননীয় শ্রোতাগণ, সকলকে আমার বিনম্র সশ্রদ্ধ আন্তরিক ধন্যবাদ। It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks. I, Shomi Akhtar, on behalf of BASE, extend very hearty gratitude to the speaker, Professor Sabuj Sarkar, for his informative and knowledgeable session. I also thank all the participants for being with us, inviting you all to the next lectures and panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shomi Akhtar.
Thank you, প্রফেসর সরকার। পরে দেখা হবে, ভালো লাগলো খুব লেকচার
একদম
শুনে।
একদম, আপনিও ভালো থাকবেন, দেখা হবে, যোগাযোগ হবে।
ওকে, বাই বাই।
ঠিক
ওকে,
আছে।